this is Dr. Jean, dear future people. In the last video, we said that if people in 2022 understood what we were talking about, then there could be a conceptual revolution. This is about some of the practical implications in such a would-be revolution. One of the topics we are going to explore today is hierarchy. Well, what is hierarchy? Hierarchy is a functional organization in human communities which is a useful tool to accomplish certain tasks. Remember what we said in the last few videos, that coordination is going to be extremely important in promoting community-level social cooperation. This cooperation mandates that you have some degree of coordination. And this coordination is going to be extremely useful. And remember, we talked about the divine state of mind, and we talked about community spirit, and all of those are based on coordination, of course. But we also said that coordination need not be simplistic, because if it is simplistic, it can lead to very severe, significant, serious side effects. Well, there is an exception to that. In certain situations where you find yourself in imminent danger, then there have to be certain simplifications. You have to have very well coordinated community so that you can avert imminent danger. You can give response to danger. Well, a hierarchy is a functional matrix where you have multiple levels, and on the top level you have individuals or a group of individuals who have experience, organized experience, and this experience is going to help making certain decisions that others will need to follow. And others with less amount of experience will need to trust in the ones that have more experience, because this experience is absolutely necessary in making the right decisions. Well, there are two fields where hierarchy is going to be a very important tool, and in fact, a tool that helps in the majority of cases. One is the military, and the other one is medicine. What is the common denominator between the military field and the medical field? Well, the common denominator is that in both fields you have to take quick decisions based on limited data. And you have a high variety of situations, and you have to be able to use your experience, adapting it to the given situation. Notice that in Vitologia, we almost never use quotations, quotes, and we very rarely, if ever, use proper names. There have to be exceptions always, and the exception here is to highlight the point that in military operations, an organized mind based on abundant experience and organization based on integration and proper digestion and processing of these experiences is going to be very important, because you need to use your experiences in a very unique way, in a unique situation. And for that, you have to have an abundance of well-organized experience. In medicine, the situation is very similar. You have to have experience and intuition, because those things improve your judgment. And your judgment is going to be crucial in arriving at decisions based on limited data, and these decisions can be life-saving. So you really have to have a solid judgment, which you use in a unique situation in a unique way. But of course, there can be side effects to the idea of hierarchy. And remember what we said, that if we mechanically extend the domain of any function, then you will have problems, because the function was originally defined for a certain domain, and if you use it outside of that domain by a mechanistic linear extrapolation, then the truth value of that function outside of its original domain is going to diminish, right? So now we are going to examine what happens if we artificially extend the principle of hierarchy to any situations outside the military field, the medical field, and we arrive at an absolute domain, which is authority. So the basis of this extension is that if somebody does something right in the medical field or the military field, then that somebody is a great person, or it's a great institution, or it's a great organization, and then everything else will be done right by that individual or organization. But is that really the case? Is it possible that a doctor or a military leader will be the most appropriate person to make all decisions in all other fields? Well, of course, that might not be so simple. Uh, but this is not only about persons or a group of persons, but it's also about information. So how do you get your information? Well, you say that this source proved to be reliable in a given situation. And then you extend that and you say that if this source was relatively reliable in this circumstance, then this source will be reliable in all circumstances. Okay? Or you may not even base this on your own experience, because you say, well, this source is absolute. This source has prestige, it has popularity, and so I choose to trust this source. Trust this source in terms of what? Do you trust this source in terms of everything, like an absolute domain? You think that if this source was reliable in one thing, it necessarily and automatically will be reliable in everything else, because it's a well-known organization, because it's a well-known company? Well, let's see. So this mechanism, and that is linear extrapolation of functional hierarchy, is the easiest way to form an opinion where experience and knowledge are minimal. Okay? So if you do not have an abundant information source that is local, based on unique life experience. Let's take the example of an individual. If you as an individual do not have abundant information which you have organized, digested, processed, integrated in a unique way, then you have nothing else but to trust an outside source for any information at all. And then the easiest way out for you is going to be to use the authority principle. And that is, take an organization or an individual or a group of individuals that you trust, and then listen to them, follow them. This is a very simple form of communication, which might work very well if you have an imminent danger, such as in the field of medicine or the military field. Yet, if you do this, if you abuse this by using this principle in every possible field, and if you neglect your own life experience, then you will have to follow the authority principle. That is the extension of this specific functional hierarchy. So let's take this to the extreme. Is there a situation where the authority principle is going to be actually very useful? Yes, there is such a situation. Remember what we said about the fruit tree. We said that an individual, for example, this child here, is really a continuation of the community, and more specifically is the continuation of these parents. So it is only natural that the child will be linked to the life experiences of the child's ancestors and most directly to the parents. So the child will then use the authority principle by simply trusting that the parents know everything and that the experiences, the life experience of the parents can be used for almost anything. So it is natural that the child would look for guidance and consulting, and it's the only thing that the child can do. The authority principle in this situation, therefore, has a relatively high truth value. So for the child, the authority principle is going to be very, very important and useful. Now let's take this to the extreme on the other side. Let's talk about side effects of the authority principle. So the authority principle becomes risky when it is not used in certain situations, but in every situation. When the domain of the authority principle is extended too far, you have an absolute authority which extends to any domain. You have somebody or something, be it an organization, be it a person, be it an imaginary person, or even an idea, and you take the authority of that object, again, person, an idea, an organization, a common ancestor, an abstract parent, an abstract institution, to the extreme. And if you do that, then you arrive at the idea of an idol. So notice that here, linear extrapolation into infinity will mean that you have an unlimited domain. In other words, this person or organization or institution in your eyes will have authority in everything. You see? And so that means that the truth value of this is going to be close to zero in most instances. Why? Because you artificially extended the domain into infinity. A local domain is extended into infinity. Now, this is the idea of the absolute, right? So everything that you experience is local, and all your sources are going to be local. But if you extend the authority of your local source into infinity, then your local becomes an absolute with an unlimited domain and a truth value close to zero because of the magnitude of your extension. This close to zero truth value will lead to the idea of idolatry. And that is because any judgment, any knowledge, any experience is always local. You have to understand that all the persons you trust, all the organizations, all the ideas you trust, always started out locally. And therefore, they had a certain domain that you then extend. And the more you extend that domain, the more your truth value is going to diminish. So when you arrive at infinity, then you have an infinite domain with a very low truth value. And we call that absolute. Absolute has a domain of infinity. The problem with the absolute, any kind of absolute, is that you ignore the local uniqueness. And therefore, since local uniqueness always has a domain, you ignore the original domain of that something or someone. So absolute also means that you place a person or an idea into an artificial plane, which transcends variety and change. Remember what we said, that reality, and here we just simplify reality as space-time, okay? Reality is, of course, much more than that. But for our purposes today, reality is going to be space-time. Space-time is not empty, right? You have different conditions and different circumstances in every single locality. And therefore, you have different truth value that you can assign to that area of space. So that if your truth value is high and it is unlimited, so no matter where you are in space-time, your truth value is always fixed, it's always a given, then that space is not real. That space is virtual, it's artificial. The absolute is always distinct. And why absolute must be distinct, motionless, fixed, we're going to talk about in the next few slides. Well, suffice it to say here that the absolute, the idea of absolute means a low variability matrix, a virtual, empty, low impact field. So, to demonstrate this, here you have sand, and somebody drew this shape or this pattern of shapes in the sand. And of course, this is going to be subject to the wind, to temperature, to the fancy of the person who drew this with certain irregularities. This is local, unique, and actual. Now, if you take the absolute idea of this, something universal, something imaginary, then you have a fixed idea which came from this, which was originally local, unique, and actual. And it became universal, absolute, and imaginary. And this is due to abstraction, okay? This is due to simplification. This is not independent of you. This came out of your mind, okay? Here, this is an actual orange, okay? And you squeeze that orange, and you have orange juice. And here, you have orange juice by standard fixed processes, okay? So this is the idea of an orange juice, but it's not actual because it has all kinds of fixed, homogeneous, artificial things in it. For example, additives, coloring agents, preservatives, which are all standard and fixed, okay? So this is going to be something local. For example, in time, because it can go bad, because it doesn't have preservatives in it. This is going to be fixed. And notice that this is again a metaphor, okay? Your idea is also actual. It also has a domain. And the artificial abstraction of this is going to be more uniform. But for that, you need somebody abstracting, right? So it's mind dependent. That means it is artificial. So you may bake your bread uniquely according to your taste, according to your available ingredients, your particular style, or whatever. So bread is local, unique, and actual. The abstraction, which leads to the idea of money, making it universal, absolute, and imaginary, is a very human process. Okay? And we go back to this. What was the original domain of our authority principle? Well, it was the domain of a child, having very limited experience and therefore trusting what the child is a continuation of, and that is the life experience of the parents, of the lineage, of the community, right? Mediated by the parents. And here you have the artificial extension to the authority principle into infinity with an infinite domain, with something absolute as an abstraction, and that is idolatry. So, taking this one step further, we have a reference frame. A reference frame that is used locally as a base for comparison, okay, for anything, okay? So you want to value something as compared to things that you have known the value of, okay? So you compare things to things. You have a standard base for comparison, okay, based on your local factors. Now, if you extend that, then you have an absolute reference frame. And notice that an absolute reference frame is going to be what is trying to be indifferent to customs, conditions, patterns, your local uniqueness, okay? And so therefore you have a low variability matrix where an absolute reference frame has any degree of usefulness, right? So these absolute reference frames, because they are based on abstraction, because they are based on local patterns artificially extended, are always artificial. And therefore they are virtual and imaginary, because they, although pretending to be objective and absolute, they really are linked to a local mind function. So it's a contradiction in terms, isn't it? So the problem with idolatry is that it tries to do the impossible, okay? It transcends locality so that it seems unchanged, universal, and homogeneous, right? Whereas in real life, this is not what we see. We see actual things with a high degree of local uniqueness, right? A high degree of variety, a high degree of change, okay? And you ignore all of these to arrive at the absolute, so that you artificially and mechanistically extend the domain of something, and then you arrive at the absolute. And notice that this also means that there is a definite boundary between the absolute and the actual. And so there arrives a tension between your absolute virtual reality and your actual reality. And the problem with idolatry is that it kind of evades this tension by placing this special kind of virtual reality in the distance. Okay? So you have an idol that is distinct from this reality here. It's somewhere elsewhere, somewhere far away, somewhere high up. And you need that distancing because you want to resolve the tension between what is absolute and therefore artificial and what is actual and therefore local. So here we have something that is variable, continuous, and infinite. And that is the nature of the divine. And here you have something that is absolute, distinct, and therefore distant because it differs from the actual, right? And the only way that this tension between the actual and the absolute can be resolved is by placing it into the distance. So, knowing all of this, understanding the mechanism of linear extrapolation and how we arrive at the absolute uh, by using linear extrapolation, let's try to talk about beauty and truth. Well, beauty, as taken an absolute thing, is thought to be a given. It is fixed. It is a gift. It is a gift that anyone can get, anyone can see, and therefore it is objective. Why? Because it doesn't depend on the subject, because everyone can see it the same way, right? It is fixed. So it is like an apple that is ready to be plucked. An apple. Okay, no matter the size, no matter the taste, no matter anything, it is an apple. It is an absolute. Well, if you think about what we said about linear extrapolation, if we understand that there is actuality and locality involved here, then beauty seems more like a condition, okay? It has to do with health, proportion, harmony, which are all subject to change. Beauty is a process and a direction. It is formed, it becomes, it changes, right? So, in other words, what is beauty here and now, it may not be somewhere else. Beauty is specific to the observer because the observer has certain interests, certain sensitivity. It may be in a certain condition. Okay, so what does visual beauty mean to somebody who is blind, right? So, in other words, beauty is always a relationship, right? This relevant to that. And that beauty is specific to the observer and that it depends on sensitivity and interest and condition means that somebody may see this as not beautiful, whereas somebody may see this as beautiful, whereas somebody else will see this also as very, very beautiful, depending on sensitivity, interest, etc. Beauty also changes. It is a sort of harmony, proportionate growth that is not universal and it's not permanent. Okay? It is formed over a long period of time and it changes with time. It needs constant nurturing, attending, taking care of. It needs a lot of love and attention. Beauty, okay, can be that of a child, which needs constant nurturing. Beauty can be that of an idea, okay, which needs constant nurturing. Beauty can be of an idea of imagination that also needs nurturing. we talked about beauty, and we would see a lot of analogy in terms of the connection between beauty and truth. Truth, like beauty, can also be thought as absolute. It is given, it is fixed. It is a gift there to see for everyone. It is objective. It is an apple ready to be plucked. But then, if we dig a little bit deeper, then we are going to see that truth is a condition, it is subject to change, right? Truth is a process and a direction. It is formed, it becomes, it changes. And truth is specific to the observer. Let's take an example. Here, for example, there is a red tomato, and here are yellow tomatoes. Well, if somebody has never seen yellow tomatoes, that somebody will not even imagine that there could be something like yellow tomatoes, and it is a given for that somebody that all tomatoes are red. Okay? And the key here is that because of the life experience of that somebody, always associating a ripe tomato fruit with the color red, it doesn't even come to question that a ripe tomato can be of any color at all until one day in a different locality in time or in space, one sees a yellow ripe tomato. And then the truth, a local truth, has changed because of local conditions. So, essential truth, local truth, is something relevant to everyday life. And that needs to be always digested, organized, and it needs to be assigned a specific domain arising from life experience, and that means a unique local perspective. And that perspective needs not be distinct, separate, but nevertheless it's unique. So your essential truth, that is practical truth, actual truth, is going to be dynamic. You know, the pyramid has this or that attribute. But the pyramid actually changes, you see? Okay, so its attributes, its properties always change. Now, this change may be slow. You don't even detect it, okay? But if you have a different scale of observation, for example, in time, okay, then you will see that what you thought would be permanent using a very small time scale, okay, all of a sudden is seen changing, okay, just because you extended your time scale, okay. So there is variety. It just takes a different perspective to actually detect that type of change and variety. So we come back to this picture here. So you have an actual truth, okay, which is subject to the wind, to the fancy of the person drawing these lines here, okay? It is subject to multiple influences, okay? And you have a static, motionless truth with an absolute reference frame, okay, which is permanent and fixed, okay? And for that, you need abstraction. And who makes an abstraction? Certain minds make an abstraction. And the idea is that your abstraction capacity may be different in one sentient being as compared to the other. So your fixations, your absolutes, okay, are fixations and absolutes for you, not necessarily for everyone. Space is not empty, time is not empty. So truth cannot be empty either. Truth has to be in connection with other things, with other circumstances and conditions and other truths. Okay? And it does not have fixed properties either, because the properties come from abstractions, classifications, okay, from different observers or thinkers, okay, and the truth is in connection, in direct relationship with these observers. And if the observers are different, then the relationship is going to be different, okay? So truth is going to be dynamic. It's going to be organic, and it's not going to be separate. Okay? So you have a truth value. You have a truth value for you. How relevant this statement or this rule or this law is in this particular locality, right? So truth needs to be organized, digested, processed, adapted locally, right? It does not have an absolute reference frame. It does not have an infinite domain. Or if you extend the truth, okay, then that means that your truth value is going to be lower and lower and lower. So adopting a truth can be a statement, any kind of information, without adapting, that is arriving there by extension, okay, by linear extrapolation, okay, where a local observation, a local perspective is not taken into account, will lead to an absolute fixed reference frame. And if you have an absolute and fixed reference frame, then you arrive at the idea of existence, which for us is going to be empty, right? Existence has only usefulness if you have an absolute reference frame, right? You take things out of context, okay? You make something independent of the relationship, of the organic relationship that links it to other things. And that's where you use existence. And you cannot really use existence anywhere else, okay? So you have fixed dimensions, fixed variables, fixed angles, fixed perspectives, and you have an empty space-time, in other words, a low variability matrix. And you have an artificial reference frame. So, on the other hand, the life experience mechanism guarantees your uniqueness, guarantees your unique content, okay? And that means that you will arrive at a definite truth value for everything. So you do not take anything at face value, because if you do, then you use the authority principle out of place, okay? What you're doing is idolatry. And maybe idolatry is good for you, I don't know. But idolatry will have its own consequences. So, if you have a low truth value, what that means is that you will need to rethink and review things, okay? A low truth value, if accepted at face value, you think it's absolute truth, whereas it's not very relevant for you, okay? Then practically what you're doing is you neglect the life experience mechanism. You neglect the unique digestion and unique integration of that value, of that truth. So fashion, success, popularity, it's based on emulating and imitating. And the problem with that enhances uniformity, okay? You place things in absolute reference frames. So what is fashionable here is also fashionable elsewhere, okay? And with that, you decrease natural variety. And therefore, you arrive at artificial virtual things. Okay? You delegate out your uniqueness and you basically are going to be subject to fashion to go. Now, the problem with this is going to be that if you subscribe to uniformity, okay, if you neglect local digestion, adaptation, and integration, okay, then fashion is going to become a mind virus. So notice that social cooperation needs coordination, and that's wonderful. And some degree of coordination is necessary for all social activities, and that is also wonderful. But if you extend the function of such a thing as hierarchy or authority to an imaginary space, then you arrive at absolute reference frames that are universal. Okay? And all you need to do then is to forget that any truths, any information, any kind of values have specific relevance locally. And if you forget that, you arrive at simplification and uniformity. Okay? And the minute you arrive at uniformity, then the idea of propaganda is formed. So you have a virus here, and that virus is going to infect you, okay? And you are going to then give this virus to a large number of people. So you have pandemia situation. The same thing can be used as an analogy, okay, to the mind. So you have a mind virus. And notice that the common denominator between a biological agent, such as a biological virus, and the mind virus is uniformity. You see, uniformity here arrives from neglecting locality, right? And uh, imagining that there is such a thing as a universal absolute reference frame, right? And then without adaptation, you adopt, you use this absolute reference frame without assigning domains and truth values, and that is local relevance. And so you have basically a mind virus situation where you have a pandemia of a mind virus. And that's what we are going to talk about when this mechanism is abused next time. So let's summarize all of this. We started out with the idea that hierarchy, and that is a relatively simple coordination, is necessary in certain situations. Then we said that we generalized the idea of hierarchy and we arrived at the authority principle. And then we said that we then extended mechanistically the authority principle and we arrived at the idea of the absolute. And so this absolute is going to be what we call idolatry. And this idolatry will then function as a mind virus, decreasing the natural variety, the natural uniqueness. Okay? And then we go back to the idea of simplistic coordination. okay, and mechanistic abstractions with an infinite domain and a very low truth value. So with that, we are going to stop here today. And the next time, we are going to see some of the practical implications of this mechanism by investigating parasitism and parasites. So thank you and goodbye for now.